Hi everyone, welcome back to Tales Unveiled. Tonight's story begins on an ordinary night. At least, that's what Jake thought. It was just past midnight, and Jake, 23 years old, was behind the counter at Morrison's gas station, like he was most nights. While his college friends were out partying or catching up on sleep, Jake was working extra hours. He was paying his own way through business school, and every shift counted. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And more than that, Jake had grown to really care about the people who came through those glass doors. You see, this station was right off a busy stretch of highway, and Jake had worked there for 3 years. He knew all the regulars by name. He memorized their coffee orders, asked about their kids, even remembered little things like birthdays or their dog's name. He had a small notebook under the counter where he jotted things down. It reminded him of his mom. She used to do the same when she worked at a diner. Jake's mom raised him alone. She worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and there were months when they could barely scrape by. He remembered seeing her count out pennies to put just enough gas in their old car. She used to say, "Always help others when you can, Jake. One day, it might be you who needs a help." And Jake listened. That lesson stuck with him, right down to his bones. The job wasn't easy. There were nights when angry customers yelled at him over gas prices, or when he had to break up arguments in the parking lot. But there were also small, meaningful moments, like when Mr. Peterson's car declined and Jake quietly paid for his fuel, or when Mrs. Thompson's car wouldn't start at 2 a.m. and Jake stood out in the freezing rain to help jump it. He never told anyone about those things. That's just who he was. Things started to change when the gas station was bought out by a major corporation a few weeks ago. The new regional manager, Mr. Phillips, was all about numbers. He installed new security cameras everywhere and printed out a list of non-negotiable rules in bold red font. No discounts. No exceptions. No handouts. This is a business, Mr. Phillips would say over and over, not a charity. Jake tried to keep doing his job the same way, but he could feel things shifting. The atmosphere had gotten colder. The regulars noticed it too. Some stopped coming altogether. Then came that October night. The air outside had turned crisp, and Jake was sipping lukewarm coffee when he saw headlights pull into the lot. The car was a beat-up old Honda, its engine sputtering. He could hear it even from inside. It rolled slowly up to pump 4 and stopped with a jolt. The woman who stepped out looked tired, like the day had wrung her out completely. She was dressed in business clothes, but they were rumpled, like she'd been wearing them for hours. Jake spotted a baby sleeping in the back seat, bundled in a blanket. The woman came inside, clutching her wallet like it might vanish if she let go. "Hi," she said, barely above a whisper. I need to get home to Brighton. I only have $15. How far will that get me?" Jake glanced at the pump prices. Brighton was at least 90 miles away. With $15, she wouldn't even make it halfway. He looked back at her. Her shoulders were tense, eyes red from exhaustion, or maybe holding back tears. "How much would you need to make it all the way?" he asked. "About $25 worth," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been to 3 other stations already. I started a new job last week, but I don't get paid until next Friday. I thought I had enough to get through, but..." Jake didn't need her to finish. He'd seen that look before on his mom's face too many times. He didn't even think about it. He opened his wallet and pulled out a $10 bill. "Here," he said, handing it over. "Don't worry about it." The woman froze. "I can't let you do that." "It's just $10, Jake said, smiling. "Pay it forward when you can." She stared at him for a moment, like she wasn't sure if this was real. Then her eyes filled with tears and she mouthed, "Thank you," before hurrying back to her car. Jake had just finished authorizing the pump when Mr. Phillips stormed out of the back office. His face was red, eyes fixed on the security feed, showing pump 4. "What did you just do?" he barked. Jake blinked. "Sir, did you just let someone underpay for gas?" "She had a baby in the car," Jake said. "She was trying to get home." "I don't care if she had 10 babies," Phillips shouted. "This isn't charity. Did you pay the difference yourself?" Jake nodded. "Yes, sir. It was only $10. That's theft of company time and services. Philip snapped. You're fired. Clean out your locker and get out. Jake stood there, stunned. 3 years. Every holiday worked. Every extra shift covered. Never late. Never complained. Gone. Because he helped someone. For a moment, he thought about arguing. But then he heard his mom's voice in his head again. Your character shows most when things are unfair. So Jake quietly took off his name tag and placed it on the counter. I'd do it again, he said. Sometimes being human matters more than company policy. He left without another word. Outside, the wind bit at his coat as he walked home, hands deep in his pockets. He had no idea how he'd pay for next semester's books now, but he kept picturing that baby, peacefully sleeping in the back seat, and he knew in his heart he'd made the right call. An hour later, Jake was home, curled up on his old couch, when he heard a car pull up outside. A sound way too smooth to be anything normal. He peeked through the window and froze. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, parked right outside his rundown apartment. The kind of car you only see in movies or luxury magazines. Out stepped a tall man in a crisp, dark suit, followed by the woman from earlier. But now she looked completely different. Polished, confident, wearing designer heels and a coat that probably cost more than Jake's car. The man knocked on Jake's door. Mr. Jacob Mitchell? He said as Jake opened it. Jake nodded slowly. I'm Robert Harrison, and I believe you met my daughter, Emily, earlier this evening. Jake's heart stopped. Everyone knew that name, Robert Harrison, real estate mogul, owner of half the buildings downtown, CEO of one of the biggest companies in the state. He glanced at Emily, then back at the man, then again at the Rolls-Royce parked behind him. This was not a normal night anymore. Jake stood in the doorway, stunned. His eyes shifted from Robert Harrison, yes, that Robert Harrison, to Emily, the woman he'd helped just hours ago. She gave him a warm, grateful smile, looking worlds away from the exhausted mother who had walked into the station at midnight. Please, Jake said, stepping aside. Come in. He instantly regretted how his place looked. Worn couch, secondhand bookshelf filled with old business textbooks, a single lamp with a tilted shade. But the Harrisons didn't seem to notice. Emily took a seat, her posture relaxed, as if she'd done this 100 times. Robert remained standing, looking around with a quiet kind of curiosity, the way someone might in a museum. I know this is a bit of a surprise, Robert began, but after hearing what happened tonight, I couldn't wait until morning. Jake nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. I'm sorry, I just don't understand why you're here. Emily leaned forward. Because you helped me. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything in return. And you did it even though it cost you your job. Jake rubbed his hands together nervously. It was just $10. No, Robert said firmly. It was more than that. It was character. There was a pause. Then Robert sat down across from Jake and rested his hands on his knees like a father about to tell his son something important. Emily, he said, glancing at his daughter, is one of the smartest, most capable executives I've ever known. But over the years, I started to notice something troubling, not just in her, but in many people we hired. They were brilliant, driven, educated, but completely out of touch with real life. They didn't understand struggle, or humility, or empathy. He turned back to Jake. So I did something drastic. I told Emily to take a 6-month sabbatical. No access to her accounts. No company perks. She'd live on minimum wage, drive a used car, and figure things out like everyone else. I said if she wanted to lead our company one day, she needed to understand the people we serve. Jake looked at Emily. She gave a small, sheepish nod. At first, I was furious, she admitted. I thought it was a punishment. But now, I get it. Tonight, when you helped me, it hit me hard. That there are still people out there who care, who help even when it costs them something. Jake blinked, absorbing her words. I didn't know who you were. I just thought about my mom. She used to work 2 jobs, right? Emily said gently, You told me. I saw a lot of her in your kindness. Jake leaned back on the couch, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Robert smiled. You don't have to say anything yet, but I have something to offer you. Jake's stomach twisted. He didn't know whether to brace for a job opportunity or just more disbelief. I just bought Morrison's, Robert said casually. All 28 gas stations across the state. Jake's jaw dropped. You bought Morrison's? Effective as of this evening. And your former manager, Mr. Phillips? He's been let go. His style of leadership doesn't align with our values. Jake sat there, trying not to spill the coffee he hadn't even touched. I want to offer you your job back, Robert continued, but not as a night shift clerk. I want you to manage that station. Full salary, full benefits, and the freedom to run it with your heart and your head. Jake stared at the man. Me? Manage the station? Why not? Emily chimed in. You already know the people. They trust you. You've been running it better than anyone ever could. All we'd be doing is making it official. Jake rubbed his forehead. I don't even have a degree yet. I'm still in school. Robert grinned. Then we'll work around your classes. I built my first company before I ever got a diploma. What matters is your integrity, your instincts, and the way you treat people. Jake was silent for a moment. The idea was so big, so sudden, it felt like someone else's life. You really believe I can do this? He asked. I already know you can, Robert said, but you'll have to prove it. Not to me, but to yourself. Jake's thoughts went to all the nights he'd stood behind that counter, wishing he could do more, to the stories he collected in his little notebook, to Mr. Peterson, to Mrs. Thompson, to that baby sleeping in the back seat tonight. Finally, he looked up and nodded. Okay, he said, I'll do it. 3 weeks later, the Morrison's gas station off Highway 18 didn't look all that different on the outside, but inside, everything had changed. Jake now wore a clean button-up shirt with his name stitched on the chest. Manager. He walked the aisles like a man on a mission, talking to customers, fixing the coffee machine, checking inventory. The regulars had started returning, and new faces came too, drawn by the good energy and something else. The Pay It Forward program. Jake had started it in his first week as manager. A small box by the register where customers could donate $1 or $2 to help cover gas or groceries for people in genuine need. Every transaction was tracked. Every case vetted. It wasn't about handouts. It was about second chances. Safety nets. Hope. Some people came in skeptical. But it didn't take long for word to spread. A nurse got a flat tire and couldn't pay for a tow. Covered. A factory worker's paycheck was delayed, and he needed to get to his shift. Covered. A single mom's debit card failed, and her kids were in the car. Covered. Jake didn't cover it all himself. The community did, and they did it because they trusted him. By the end of the first month, the station's profits had doubled. Customers came not just for fuel, but because they wanted to support a place that stood for something. Other Morrison's locations began calling Jake for advice. Robert Harrison even asked him to train new managers. But Jake still worked occasional night shift. He said it helped him stay grounded. I like hearing their stories, he'd tell Emily. It reminds me why we're doing this. One night, Emily stopped by the station around closing time. She watched Jake wipe down the counter, restock the snacks, and greet a teenager who wandered in looking nervous. She smiled. You're doing something special here, you know, she said as he joined her outside under the flickering sign. I'm just doing what my mom taught me, Jake replied. Help when you can. That's all. Emily looked at him for a long moment. That night, she said softly, you taught me more about business than I ever learned in 15 years of corporate strategy meetings. Jake looked surprised. Really? She nodded. Because you reminded me what business is supposed to be about. People, not just profits. Jake chuckled. Funny. I always thought I had to choose one or the other. Emily shook her head. Turns out, the best businesses are the ones that don't. Jake's story at this point had taken on a life of its own. College students wrote papers about him. Business schools invited him to guest lectures. News anchors called him a blueprint for ethical entrepreneurship. And while Jake appreciated the recognition, he never quite got used to the spotlight. He always said the same thing when asked. It wasn't a big gesture. It was $10 and a choice. That's all. But what Jake didn't always talk about was how much he'd wrestled with that choice. The night he walked home after being fired, there were doubts, waves of them. He had no idea a Rolls Royce would show up at his door. No clue that his little act would spark something statewide. All he knew was that he saw a mother and a baby in need, and he chose to act. Years later, Jake still returned to that idea often, that most turning points come in quiet, everyday disguises. He started including that lesson in employee training. You don't need to wear a cape or have a title, he'd say. You just need to pay attention. Most people miss the moment because it doesn't look like one. At the 5-year anniversary of the Pay It Forward program, Morrison's held a celebration. They invited every store manager, dozens of longtime customers, and the families who've been helped over the years. The event took place in a large hall decorated with banners that read, 5 years of fueling kindness. Emily Harrison gave a speech. She kept it short, direct, just like her. We started with one man, one act, and one small jar change, she said. Now it's a statewide movement. And the most important thing I've learned is this. The best businesses don't just sell, they serve. Then she invited Jake to the stage. Jake wasn't much of a speaker, but the room quieted the moment he stepped up. He looked out at the crowd, truckers, cashiers, families, college kids, and even some retired employees who had come out just to see him. 5 years ago, Jake began, I was working the night shift, counting cups of coffee, cleaning bathrooms, studying in the back when it got slow. A few people chuckled softly, and one night, someone walked in who changed my life. But at the time, I thought I was helping her. Funny how life works. He paused and smiled. Tonight isn't about me. It's about what happens when we decide to care, even when no one's watching. It's about every customer who tossed $1 into that jar. Every cashier who stayed 5 minutes late to help someone get home. Every single person who believed that kindness and business don't have to live in different worlds. He raised a glass of soda in a plastic cup, Jake's style, through and through, to good hearts, to second chances, and to the next person who's about to change someone's life and doesn't even know it yet. The room stood to applaud. Not long after that celebration, Jake found himself walking into a very different kind of meeting. This one was with a group of local high schoolers. They had started a business club and had invited Jake to speak. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't used to being seen as a role model, especially not in classroom. But the teacher who reached out explained that Jake's story had inspired a group of teens to launch their own Mini Morrison's initiative, offering snacks and basic supplies at their school with a kindness fund for students who couldn't pay. Jake showed up early, wearing jeans and a Morrison's polo. The classroom was full of hand-painted posters that said things like "People First" and "Kindness is contagious." As he sat on the edge of a desk, talking to students about how business isn't just about spreadsheets and sales goals, he noticed one boy in the back of the room, quiet, taking notes, wearing a hoodie a little too big. After the talk, the boy approached him. "Mr. Mitchell?" "Just Jake," he said with a smile. "My mom said to thank you." The boy said, "You helped her with gas a few years ago. She never forgot it." Jake's smile faded slightly. He leaned in. "Was she driving a Honda?" The boy nodded. "She told me she was so embarrassed that night. She didn't want to take your money, but she said it changed everything for her. She got promoted. Things got better." Jake swallowed hard. It wasn't just a random act. It was the beginning of something for that family. 2. "Tell her I said she changed my life just as much," he said. Back at his original station, the one that started it all, Jake had created a small wall display called the Ripple Board. It featured stories from customers and employees about how one small kindness led to something bigger. There were dozens of stories pinned to it now. A grandmother who had her groceries paid for by a stranger and then started volunteering at the food pantry. A man who used the Pay It Forward fund to make it to a job interview, then got hired and donated his first paycheck to fund. A woman who broke down on the way to a hospital, received help at Morrison's, and later returned to sponsor a scholarship in Jake's name. The stories went on and on. Jake would walk past the board every evening before heading home. It reminded him that impact rarely comes all at once. It comes in ripples. And those ripples often begin with just $10. One day, Robert Harrison came by the station unannounced. It was rare. He'd mostly stepped back from day-to-day operations since Emily took over. Jake greeted him with a grin. "Didn't expect to see you here, sir." "Just wanted to stop by," Robert said. "Check on the place that started it all." They sat outside on the bench by the window, sipping coffee. Robert turned to Jake. I used to think business was all about numbers, expansion, market share. But watching what you've built, this community, this culture, I realize now that people were the real assets all along." Jake nodded. "That's what my mom always said. If you invest in people, the return takes care of itself." Robert chuckled. "Smart woman." Jake smiled. "Yeah, she was right about a lot of things." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun dip behind the highway. And then Robert said, "I've got one more idea, something bigger, but I want to run it by you first." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Something bigger? You already bought an entire gas station chain. What could be bigger than that?" Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes gleaming the way only entrepreneurs get when they've had a breakthrough idea. "What if we took the pay it forward model nationwide?" Jake blinked. "Nationwide. Think about it," Robert continued. "Every major city has gas stations, grocery stores, small businesses that are just going through the motions. What if we partner with them, train their teams, gave them the tools, the framework, to run kindness-based programs at work, with structure, with accountability, with impact?" Jake sat back, tried to imagine it. Not just a handful of Morrison's locations, but chains, coffee shops, mom-and-pop convenience stores, places all over the country, each one creating a ripple of compassion. Robert went on, "You've built something special. You didn't just change one station. You changed how people think about business. I want you to lead this. We'll form a nonprofit division. You'll be the director." Jake was quiet for a long time. He thought about that first night again. The cold, the hopeless walk home, the moment he thought he'd lost everything. And now here was the same man who fired his manager, asking him to change the world. "I don't know if I'm the guy for something that big," Jake admitted. Robert smiled. "Neither did I, until you proved otherwise." Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'd have to build a team." "You'll have one. We'd need infrastructure. We'll fund it. And I need to finish school," Jake added, half joking. Robert grinned. "I'll personally make sure your professors give you time off, or a few honorary credits." Jake laughed, finally letting the idea settle into his bones. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if we keep the core intact." Robert tilted his head. "Meaning, no PR stunts, no flashy campaigns, no watered-down promises. It has to stay real. Small acts, quiet help, the kind of things people feel, not just notice." Robert nodded slowly, with the respect of a man who knew a real leader when he saw one. "Deal." Within the year, Jake launched the Ripple Project, a national nonprofit dedicated to spreading sustainable kindness through local business. The model was simple. Train employees to recognize real need, set up verified kindness funds, and empower communities to support each other in small, tangible ways. They didn't advertise. They didn't chase headlines. But their impact grew quietly and steadily. By year 2, they were operating in 14 states. By year 3, they were partnered with over 800 businesses. By year 4, the Ripple Project had helped over 100,000 people. And through it all, Jake stayed grounded. He still lived in a modest home, still visited the original Morrison station every other Saturday, still read the handwritten stories on the Ripple board. Emily, now the full-time CEO of Harrison Holdings, often invited Jake to her leadership retreats to speak. Not as a businessman, but as a reminder. Jake doesn't sell products, she would tell new hires. He builds trust. And that, my friends, is what people buy into for life. One day, on a warm spring afternoon, Jake brought his mom to see the headquarters of the Ripple Project. She hadn't been there before, He wanted to wait until it truly felt ready. He opened the glass doors for her and watched her take it all in. The simple design, the wall of thank you letters from across the country, the large, backlit sign above the welcome desk that read, "Kindness," scaled. She turned to him, eyes misty. "You know, I used to worry about you, Jake." He smiled. "Why?" "I thought you were too soft for the world," she said, gently patting his arm. "Turns out the world just needed more people like you." Jake felt his throat tighten. "I just did what you always said," he whispered. "Help others when you can." They stood for a while, watching a group of interns walk by in Ripple Project t-shirts, carrying donation boxes and printed outreach maps. "Mom," Jake said, glancing over at her, "you still remember that day when we had to count coins to get to the grocery store?" She laughed. "Which one?" "Exactly," Jake said. "I think about those days every time I see someone coming short on change. That's why I do this. Not because it's charity. Because I remember what it feels like to need help and still want to hold onto your dignity." She looked up at him with pride, then reached into her purse and pulled out something small and crumpled. It was a $10 bill. "I want this framed," she said, handing it to him. Jake blinked. "What?" "I've been carrying this around for years," she said. "It's the amount you gave to that woman. The seed that started everything." Jake took the bill in his hands, folded carefully but worn at the edges. "I'll put it next to the receipt," he said, smiling. "Let people see that sometimes change doesn't come from a grant or a policy or a campaign. Sometimes it comes from a decision made in 30 seconds behind a counter." Today, the Ripple Project continues to grow. And if you ever stop by that original Morrison station off Highway 18, you'll still see Jake's little notebook under the counter. You'll still see the pay it forward jar, now built into the register system. You'll still find his framed name tag, the receipt, and the $10 bill hanging on the wall. Jake himself? You might catch him sweeping the lot, handing out coffee, or asking an old customer how their dog is doing. Because that's who he is. And that's what real change looks like. Not grand, not loud, but steady, faithful, and rooted in something deeper than business. Rooted in kindness. You never know who's watching, Jake often says. But more importantly, you never know whose life you might change. And in the end, isn't that the most powerful business plan of all?